I just pooped. Let's get started. So, Happy New Year's to my 4 subscribers, all of whom I at least kind of know. Welcome back to another overlong and mediocre video. The only thing that's been on my mind lately is the Sharkboy and Lavagirl sequel. So I'm going to talk about Sharkboy and Lavagirl, and Spy Kids, and Robert Rodriguez. And then I'm going to turn it into a pretentious analysis of what makes Sharkboy and Lavagirl nostalgic. Let's get started. Sharkboy and Lavagirl remains so entrenched in the public consciousness of people, particularly around my age, despite it being hot trash. There is the aspect of the so bad it's good effect, but I'd argue there's more to it than that. When The Adventures of Sharkboy and Lavagirl in 3D was released, it was overwhelmingly panned by critics and by audiences. Many criticized the visual effects and 3D conversion, while others also criticized the acting, story, and dialogue, while the visual appeal received some praise. It was also a box office bomb, grossing only $69 million nice on a $50 million budget. While that it sounds like a profit, it doesn't really factor in the marketing costs and other external factors. So why is it that 15 years later, Netflix is releasing a sequel to this heavily criticized failure? And why am I so excited about it? Let's discuss Robert Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez is, of course, the director and creator of Sharkboy and Lavagirl. For a long time, he basically made one type of movie for two different audiences. These were over-the-top action romps a la Quentin Tarantino, but a bit more cartoonish. But some, like the Machete movies and Planet Terror, were directed at adults, while movies like Spy Kids and our namesake, Sharkboy and Lavagirl, were directed at children. And it's the way he directs children's movies that I want to talk about. Because I'm not a Rob Rod stan or anything, but he probably makes the most pure examples of what a children's movie is or can be. One thing that critics throw out a lot when reviewing kids' movies is if the movie can appeal to adults as well. If the writing is smart, if there are a few subtle jokes only adults can pick up on, etc. This is the appeal of, say, Pixar movies, which are directed at children but have enough emotional weight to make your average homosexual or middle-aged white woman cry. These are good qualities for a kids' movie to have, don't get me wrong, but it seems to me that old Rob Rod, he doesn't care. I remember watching a video by Pretty Much It where they were watching Spy Kids and they brought a semi-joking point that when they were younger, Spy Kids felt like their movie, that no parents were allowed. And I want to expand on that like the pretentious shitweasel that I am. There are many companies that try to make children's movies, particularly animated movies, that are almost exclusively directed at children and have very little for adults besides a few throwaway lines. These movies are, for lack of a better word, shit. Looking at you, Illumination. What makes Robert Rodriguez's films different is that his don't feel like a company throwing darts at a wall trying to figure out what kids like. There are fart jokes and loud visuals, which are quintessential bad kids movie tropes, but he adds enough batshit excitement, heart, wonder, and ambition to make the movie a hell of a time to watch. I'd like to argue, and bear with me on this, Rob Rod understands how kids work better than any other director. That sounds creepy out loud, but what I mean is that between Spy Kids and Sharkboy and Lavagirl, he has bucked the conventional rules of filmmaking in favor of just making sure that kids have a great time. Let's look at Spy Kids for just a second. Because while Sharkboy and Lavagirl was panned upon release, Spy Kids was acclaimed, achieving a 93 on Rotten Tomatoes and a 71 on Metacritic. But with audiences, it was less enthusiastic. It only achieved a 46 on Rotten Tomatoes, though it did achieve an 80 on Metacritic, but that ruins the analysis I'm going to do, so we're going to ignore that for now. When I first saw this, I wondered where the discrepancy came from. It is not uncommon for critics and audiences to disagree on the quality of a movie, but it is surprising to me when broad, crowd-pleasing blockbusters receive critical acclaim but audience unacclaim. Now, this is a theory. There aren't many peer-reviewed works on why audiences didn't like Spy Kids, but Here's my argument. To quote Will Smith, parents just don't understand. How people are entertained varies wildly among demographics. Children are more likely to be entertained by fun visuals, immature humor, action, and simple stories. Adults can be entertained by this, but they generally look for plot cohesion, complex characters, emotional weight, etc. This is oversimplifying by a lot, but I have to get to the point sometime. Spy Kids, and by extension Sharkboy and Lavagirl, present very little in terms of nuance, complexity, or emotional weight. They're simple stories with archetypal characters, and there's little to no attempt to make the audience think. In fact, the moments where these movies experiment with more mature storylines is where I think they falter. This is why I think audiences didn't vibe as well with Robert Rodriguez's movies. This is a well-known fact at this point, but a majority of this story was conceived by Robert Rodriguez's children. To me, there is something so pure about this. This movie wasn't made to achieve critical or commercial success, though I'm sure those were secondary goals. They were made because Robert Rodriguez loves his children, and he wanted to involve them in his work. This ultimately makes the plot nonsensical and the characters bland because children don't generally have the experience or education to write good screenplays. But it adds a layer of heart to the story. When Robert Rodriguez makes kids' movies, he commits more than anything to making sure that kids have a great time. While I love movies from companies like Pixar and DreamWorks, there is a formula, and quite an obvious formula at that. And this formula works. It's a good formula, but it can feel calculated. Nothing about Robert Rodriguez's kids' movies in particular feels calculated. It just feels like he wanted his kids and all kids to have a movie to call their own. But now that that cheesy shit is out of the way, let's talk about the actual technical qualities of Sharkboy and Lavagirl. Now, I love Sharkboy and Lavagirl. I really do. But let's be honest here. The technical quality is not good. It's shit. Nothing about this movie works, from the visual effects, the acting, the dialogue. Nothing works. Now, I am not in the industry yet. I don't know all the tips and tricks. But one thing I know is that 3D movies are generally made by having two cameras placed directly next to each other at about the distance of a human's eyes. These two images are meshed to make the 3D effect that you see in movies. This was not done with Sharkboy and Lavagirl, and the images were split in post-production. The problem with this is that the post-production team didn't really have the information it needed to make the 3D images on screen look good. In the case of Sharkboy and Lavagirl, and let's be honest, all 3D movies, it feels like a gimmick. 3D was the hip new thing in the early 2000s, and a lot of companies were trying to hop on the trend in order to make money, and I'm really glad we got rid of that, because 3D gives me a headache. In Sharkboy and Lavagirl, random things like the cuckoo clock just popping out at the audience, it has nothing to do with the story. It is simply to utilize the 3D and justify its reason for existing. So we're going to call this a bad directorial choice. The visual effects were another common point of criticism. While some critics praised the color and dynamics of the visuals, many pointed out how blatantly unrealistic and cartoonish they looked. I mean, nothing about Planet Drool says realistic. There's no point where an audience member is going to look at the screen and think, wow, that is so realistic. It's like porn or rags to riches stories in that way. The sharks in particular stand out to me. Also, just, this isn't relevant, but listen to the way this shark delivers this line.
Hey, it's Sharkboy. Don't take a bite out of him, boys. He's a friend.
Gets me every time. I just found out that shark is voiced by Robert Rodriguez, and it's not like groundbreaking or anything, but I thought that you should know. But back to the point. Not only do the sharks look plastic, but their aesthetic completely clashes with the rest of the movie, and to me at least, they look slightly more realistic than the other visuals. But the problem with that is that they slip into the uncanny valley and it's just eerie. So the acting. Nobody's doing a good job besides George Lopez. And we'll get to him in a bit. The problem with a movie like this is the same problem with a movie like Sky High, which is another movie I also love. But it seems like none of the actors can agree on the tone of the movie. Some of the actors understand that this is goofy and campy, and they ham up their performances a lot, while others seem to think that they should be, like, giving their all in a dramatic performance. David Arquette and Kristen Davis in particular are guilty of this. They're trying to deliver these dramatic, nuanced performances and failing at it, when this is not what this movie is asking of them. But this is also partially due to script failings, but we're going to discuss that a little bit later. Even though the performances of the child actors are technically worse, I kind of respect them a little bit more because it fits the tone of the movie more. None of them are trying at all, and it's glorious. Sasha Peterson as the Ice Princess is probably the strongest of the child actors. And her character is also the baddest bitch in the entire world, so I consider her a standout. Taylor Lautner and Taylor Dooley as Sharkboy and Lavagirl respectively actually do a pretty good job at conveying their personalities. Taylor Lautner is going for a very tough guy performance, and Taylor Dooley is playing her character very saccharine. They actually do a good job with that. The problem is their deliveries tend to be kind of awkward and wooden, and they're just never really convincing. Though I will say this, they goddamn kill their one-liners. Side note, can we talk about the fact that Max says Lavagirl's hair is purple when it's clearly pink? Jacob Davidge as Linus completely nails the snotty, entitled tone of voice for a childhood bully, but he is completely unintimidating, though he wasn't really given much to work with some of these lines. Penultimate character, Caden Boyd as Max. I actually kind of respect the fact that he performs most of his lines in a more hushed tone of voice. Child actors sometimes have a tendency to be very loud, and children tend to be loud, so that's not a problem. His performance is different than a lot of those, and so I respect that. The problem is that he can't really make any bold choices with his character, and so I don't really get any kind of semblance of his personality. I want to state something. I love these horrible performances because they are horrible. However, I don't want it to look like I am bullying child actors for doing a bad job, because that is not what I'm in the business of doing. All I'm trying to do is tell you my honest opinions about their performances, but Chris Stuckman said this once, that when a child performance is bad, it is generally due to bad direction and bad script rather than their actual talent. So I'm just gonna leave that there. I'm not here to shit on these kids. They're adults now, I think they can handle it, but that is not what I'm trying to do. They did their best, and I respect that. Finally, let's talk about George Lopez, the absolute best part of this movie. He plays 3 roles in this movie, and he hams each one up to the max, and it's glorious to watch. So, he played... When the fuck did that happen? Fuck. So, the lighting is ever so slightly different. What's that about? I forgot to plug my microphone back in. And then I had to go to work. So, we're doing it all again. Fantastic. George Lopez as the teacher, Mr. Electricidad, is really weird because he goes from supporting and nurturing to dramatic and almost authoritarian in an instant. But George Lopez brings his all to it, to the point where even though the shifts in character are a lot, he does it with enough skill where it's still entertaining. Also, this teacher is sending out his students, who are like 10 or 11 at this time, to fight a giant monster at the end of it. Like, why is he not getting them the hell out of there? He's totally getting fired after this movie. And then we have Tobor, which is robot backwards. And normally I would clown on this name, but considering it was probably conceived by Robert Rodriguez's son, it's the best name ever in existence. So, now, I did not know that George Lopez played this character for the longest time because he puts on a very, very different voice, very soft-spoken, and I'd like to say that, unironically, this is actually a great performance. It's completely different from what George Lopez has ever done before. Tobor's soft tone of voice actually provides a nice break from the constant action that is happening throughout the rest of the movie. You know, something is always happening. And so to have this character who's very gentle is nice. I don't know. Finally, we have Mr. Electric. This is the straight up hammiest that I've ever seen George Lopez. He is clearly relishing this villain role, and I genuinely love it whenever I can see actors having a really fun time on set. That's why I like the Mamma Mia movies. I watch it now as an adult, and he's actually pretty unintimidating, but I remember being terrified of him as a child. There is no attempt at restraint or nuance. He doesn't have any clear motivations, and he doesn't really have that much to do with the plot until the last 20 minutes. And it's fantastic. You know, nowadays, villains have to have very clear motivations and an understandable motivation. But here, there's no attempt to do that. He's evil for the sake of being evil, and I love it. I love every second of it. Because it's so, I don't know, carefree. It's haphazard. And it doesn't make you think. You are allowed to turn your brain off and not have to think about, oh, is Mr. Electric right? Because he's not. He's just evil. It's great. All in all, it is a fantastic character and performance from George Lopez, and I'm so disappointed that he's not returning for the sequel. Probably the worst aspect of this movie is the screenplay. Quick thing before I get into it. So, it's not unheard of to put a quote before a movie begins. Like, it's done quite a bit, usually to establish the theme or the tone of the movie. However, Sharkboy and Lavagirl does do this. But it's not a quote from like a poet or an author. It's a quote lifted from the movie Sharkboy and Lavagirl that Lavagirl says pretty early on in the movie. This quote.
Everything that is, or was, began with a dream.
Now, I can't find a clip or an image of it because Netflix doesn't let me take screenshots, so I have to find all my clips through YouTube, like an animal. But you just have to trust me on this. Please just watch the movie, and I might be the only one that gets tickled by this, but it's just, I don't know, it makes me laugh. Back to the point, I would say that only about half of the scenes in this movie are to advance the plot or develop characters, and if you've ever taken any kind of screenwriting class, you know that's a big no-no. For instance, there is no reason to say that Sharkboy lost his father, other than like in passing, because it really doesn't inform his character, and it almost never comes back into the movie until the very, very end. And then the dream journal. You know, the dream journal builds itself up to be this MacGuffin, and they get it at around the halfway point, and then Lavagirl almost instantly destroys it. I swear to God, motorcycle, shut the hell up! Wait, no, that's a helicopter. God, living in LA, you don't know the difference between a helicopter and a motorcycle. So yeah, Lavagirl destroys the dream journal. And this could maybe be interesting to prove to Max that he doesn't need the dream journal in order to remember his dreams. But it's not really done that way, and it's just kind of callously thrown out, and it doesn't work. I can't really put my finger on why it doesn't work, but it doesn't work.
We get it. It doesn't work. Move on.
Also, what the hell happened to her lava bike? he opened the dream journal and was like, Lavagirl, you have a lava bike. And then it shows up. And then after she destroys it, they move on to the next scene. And it's like the lava bike never happened. Like, at least with the shark bike thing earlier, they established that, like, it didn't dream up gas. Like, I don't know. And then everything to do with the Ice Princess and castle is just, it's weird. The first time they go to the castle, there's a tense scene where Lavagirl has to cross the bridge, but because she is too hot, she can't unless she's asleep. They end up getting kidnapped after they cross the bridge and taken back to Minus. So really, there are no reasons to have this in, because the only thing you learn is that Lavagirl cools down when she's asleep, but that never comes back into the story. Then later in the story, they finally do reach the ice castle, which I don't know how Lavagirl got in this time, since they destroyed the bridge and she's apparently able to melt ice when she's awake. But they perilously try to get the crystal heart from the center of the room, and due to a couple unfortunate events, Lavagirl gets frozen. And this could be a good plot point, but the problem is there's no consequences. She thaws 10 minutes later, suffers no ramifications. And I get it, it's a kid's movie. You don't want her to suffer, but still. And then they get the real crystal heart in a weird wedding-like ceremony. It's weird. And Bad Bitch Ice Princess tells Max that he can use it now that they've gone through this ceremony. And then they go, and he tries to use the crystal heart to freeze time, but doesn't work. And then Lavagirl, post-thawing, says only the Ice Princess can use the crystal heart. And it's so there was no point for this whole quest. The Ice Princess had no reason to lie. So what was the point of all this? And it's even worse this time because it doesn't really teach Max anything. The crystal heart is a really bad red herring. And then there's the subplot. So most of the stuff that I've been complaining about, I am going to recontextualize, but this is one part where I genuinely just don't like it. So it is not unheard of or bad to include a more mature subplot in a kid's movie, because you want it to attract adults as well, since they're the ones with the money. I mean, hopefully, we'll get a whole $600 more in a week, and Israel gets 5 million, or probably no, 5 billion. God. But I stated earlier that Robert Rodriguez's movies work best when they are devoted to making sure kids are having a good time. Kids are not going to understand the subplot. So basically what it is that Max's parents are getting divorced, but by the end of the movie, they fall back in love. The reason this doesn't work has to do with theme. Theme is a very important part of storytelling. It is basically what your story is trying to tell or teach to the audience. The theme of Sharkboy and Lavagirl is about dreaming, and how dreaming is the source of creativity and innovation. That is actually a very good theme in a kid's movie. I haven't seen too many other movies explore that theme. The problem with the subplot is that that theme is about family and how family should stick together through hardship. And that has zero to do with the theme of dreaming. It's a very jarring subplot, and it serves no purpose. If this movie does have so many issues, why is it that so many people, including myself, love it? I don't think it's revolutionary to say that Sharkboy and Lavagirl is nostalgic for a lot of people, but why is it nostalgic? It flopped at the box office. Very few people saw it, but when the trailer for the sequel was released, that trailer and Taylor Lautner started trending on Twitter. Side note, Taylor Lautner, I know you're not watching this because I have 4 subscribers, but what are you doing not coming back for this? You haven't had a major role since 2016. There was that TV show Cuckoo or whatever that you had until 2018, but I don't know anybody who ever saw that. And it's just, Taylor Dooley came back and she's neck deep in QAnon propaganda. Why couldn't you? Sorry, that was a little aggressive. I'm sorry, Taylor Lautner. Back to the point. Why is The Adventures of Sharkboy and Lavagirl in 3D nostalgic? Let's bring it back to the point that a majority of this film's plot was conceived by Robert Rodriguez's son, Racer. Quick thing, look up the names of Robert Rodriguez's kids. You will not be disappointed. Now, children are not very good storytellers. That is not a diss, it's just a fact. But children are more creative than adults will ever be because they don't really care about things like plot cohesion, complexity, nuance, dynamic characters, etc. All they care about is having a good time. Sharkboy and Lavagirl is basically what a movie directed by a child would look like, or as close as we can get to that. There's something very refreshing and innocent about that almost. Because the visuals, while horrible, are kind of exactly how I envisioned fantasy worlds when I was a child. The acting is of the same quality as children playing pretend, and the story is so batshit, and the main character is so overpowered, and that is exactly how a kid would write a story. There are plenty of movies, children's or otherwise, that attempt to make the audience feel nostalgic. While I don't think this movie was made to feel nostalgic, it feels that way now, because when you watch it, or at least when I watch it, I'm remembering what it's like to be a child with no care in the world. The problem is, as an adult, I see all the problems with it that I didn't as a child. While it's still a really enjoyable time, it doesn't have the same wonder or entertainment value that it did then, because now I'm an adult who pays rent in the middle of a pandemic. I have a college degree. I know more things. And so I know what a good movie is and Sharkboy and Lavagirl is not. And that makes me sad because I don't want to be an educated adult sometimes. I don't want to know what's going on in the world, but I have to. And the reason that I keep going back to Sharkboy and Lavagirl is because it reminds me of the time when I didn't have to care about what was going on in the world. And I can escape for a couple hours. And it's not a permanent fix, nothing is, but it's a nice break. So the reason that I love The Adventures of Sharkboy and Lavagirl in 3D is the same reason it makes me sad. It feels like childhood, and especially in this shitty year that thank God is about over, I want to go back. Well, that is all, folks. Thank you to the maybe 50 people who will watch this and the one person who gives it a dislike. But if you do happen to like it, subscribe. God, that was exactly ContraPoint's intonation. Well, wear a mask and watch We Can Be Heroes on Netflix when it premieres. Thank you. Hey, what the hell is this? I thought the video was over. Why do I have to listen to this pretentious shit weasel talk about Sharkboy and Lavagirl for another 10 minutes? Well, first of all, ouch. Second of all, things have changed. So I thought that We Could Be Heroes was being released on Netflix on New Year's Day. I was planning on releasing this video on New Year's Eve, the day before, and I might still do that, depends on when I get it all edited. But turns out they moved the release date to Christmas. I didn't find out about this until Christmas, which is today. Merry Christmas. I felt like this video would be incomplete without talking about We Can Be Heroes since it is now released. So we're gonna do that, and hopefully I can get this edited before New Year's Day. What is up with the fucking helicopters in fucking Los Angeles? I wasn't looking at the camera. We Can Be Heroes was directed by Robert Rodriguez and is the sequel to The Adventures of Sharkboy and Lavagirl in 3D. Now, I put sequel in quotes because it is more of a spin-off, considering Sharkboy and Lavagirl are barely in it, Taylor Lautner's not coming back, so Sharkboy has no lines and the top half of his face is obscured. And Taylor Dooley has maybe 5 total lines in the entire movie. And the movie doesn't even center on their kid. It centers on Pedro Pascal's daughter. I talked about how I was excited for this in the first part of this video, but I also was cautious. I didn't mention this because The problem with making a sequel to Sharkboy and Lavagirl is that Sharkboy and Lavagirl, it rests on the nostalgia. It is not very good technically, as we've discussed. And so it rests on its nostalgic factor in order to keep its audience. The problem with We Can Be Heroes is that it's being released this year, and so it can't rest on the nostalgia that Sharkboy and Lavagirl does. It kind of has to rest on its own laurels. But the problem is, if you try to make the film more competent, how do you keep the tone and the spirit of the original? Because the original is known for being incompetent. So it's a tricky balance, balancing competent filmmaking with Robert Rodriguez's unique style. That's not to say his style is incompetent, it's just for this specific thing, it's tricky. I think he did a good job. I think Robert Rodriguez struck a really good balance here because it has the same tone and energy of the original, but it has more competent screenwriting and acting, kind of. But we'll get to that in a second. I think it is a good movie. It is not perfect, far from that, but it is technically more put together than Sharkboy and Lavagirl. But there's a problem with that, which we'll discuss. So first, let's talk about the pros. I think the story in this is much stronger than the first one because there is a clearly defined arc. There is a very clear story, and every scene is part of the plot. Whereas in the first movie, as I said, there were many scenes that had nothing to do with the plot. This movie, that is not the case. It's a very fast-paced movie, and I like it. Also, the acting is much more consistent and much more right for this movie because, as I discussed, the problem with the first movie was that some people were doing too much, some people were doing too little, and George Lopez was fantastic all the way through. In this movie, all the actors here know exactly what they are supposed to do. None of them are trying to do too much. They're not digging deep into their characters and trying to understand all the motivations. The adult actors are all incredible. They play their characters with just enough skill to make them fine to watch, but they don't try hard enough so that it seems like the tone is way off. They are hamming it up. Priyanka Chopra in particular really hams it up for this role, and it kind of surprised me because I'm not used to seeing her in a role like this. And so I was kind of impressed with her performance. And then the child actors are all perfectly wooden. That's not to say they showed no emotions or anything, but all of them had somewhat awkward line deliveries, which for a movie like this is what I want. I don't want competent acting in a movie like this. I want actors looking like they're having the time of their life, but also looking like they're struggling to read these horrible lines. And the special effects are horrible, and I would have been pissed if it was anything else. If the special effects were good, I would have rioted. The whole appeal of this franchise is the bad special effects, and I think if they had tried to improve those, it would have lost a lot of people, including myself. I do think this movie is more tonally consistent in that everybody on the team knew exactly what they were making. They weren't making some Oscar-winning movie, but they weren't making a movie that was pandering to children. They were making a theme park ride of a movie, and it's great. The theme is also something I want to talk about because there are a couple themes in this movie: teamwork, leadership, etc. But one of the major themes is about responsibility, but it's done in a unique way. So the film ends with a message about how our children are going to inherit the earth, so it is our responsibility to teach our children how to handle that. And that's kind of an amazing message to put in a kids movie. There are problems with how this theme is delivered. I'm not going to get into all that. I mean, it's ham-fisted because of course it is. It's a kid's movie. But this message, it feels timely. It feels important to the time we're going through because eventually the old people are going to have to give up their power. And it feels like, at least to me, a lot of us both are very ready and not at all ready to have that responsibility. And I think to have a message like this in a kids movie in particular is very important. So I thought that was another highlight of the movie. So now we get into the problems. The problem I have with the movie is more of like an overall issue rather than something specific. And that is, I said it does strike a good balance between competent filmmaking and the batshit excitement of Robert Rodriguez's work. I do still believe that the problem is this movie is a refined, it is a concentrated Sharkboy and Lavagirl movie. Helicopters, man. It's the second one that's flown over since I started filming this. It hasn't even been 15 minutes. Jeez. It feels like if Sharkboy and Lavagirl was given a little bit more competent direction. And while that is good for the actual quality of the movie, I think one thing that is sacrificed is the wonder of it all. Because the reason I said that Sharkboy and Lavagirl means a lot to me is that it feels like if a child directed a movie. And this movie doesn't feel like that. It feels like an adult directing a kid's movie, which, you know, Sharkboy and Lavagirl was an adult directing a kid's movie, but the point is that it is more competent and thus loses that charm that the original had. And I suppose this is probably a necessary evil. They were always going to have to either dumb it down even more or make it better, because if they just repeated the same formula, it would have been stale. So part of me wonders if a sequel was a good thing after all. Like, I do appreciate the message and the escapism of the movie, especially in this shitty year. But because of how bizarre Sharkboy and Lavagirl is, can there ever be a true sequel to it without diluting the childlike, bizarre charm of it all? I guess that's it. I already did my sign off, but, you know, like and subscribe, wear a mask. Bye.